From George Bush barely escaping being eaten by Japanese cannibals to Chanel actually being a Nazi spy, we take a look at 10 famous people with unbelievable stories from World War II. Number 10. George Bush barely escaped by being eaten by Japanese cannibals. Now, barely being eaten by cannibals from the Empire of Japan, at age 20 in 1944, George H.W. Bush, the future 41st President of the United States, was nothing more than a Navy pilot. During a bomber raid against the Japanese Bonan Islands, he was shot down and nearly eaten alive. Bush was one of the 9 men who escaped damaged airplanes during the raid, but he was the only one who survived. Way to go him! He waited on a life raft protected by Allied planes while a submarine rescued him. The other 8 men were not as lucky. They were captured by Japanese soldiers and put through hell. The men were tortured, beaten, and ultimately executed. Some of their bodies were then butchered by surgeons, who served their livers and thigh meat to Japanese officers at a feast. Thanks to the crew of the USS Finback, Bush made it out alive, but if it hadn't been for him, the 43rd President of the United States would have been served as dinner. Number 9. Star Trek Scotty survived being shot 6 times. Before he was Scotty, James Doohan was a lieutenant in the Royal Canadian Army. Trained as a pilot, Doohan had a reputation as the craziest pilot in the Canadian Air Forces, because he did things like slam a plane between 2 telegraph poles just to prove it could be done. When the D-Day came in Nazi Germany, or I should say Nazi France, he was put on the ground and joined the raid on Juno Beach. Doohan personally shot 2 enemy snipers and led his troops through a field of anti-tank mines, only to be taken out by his own army. While Doohan was moving between 2 command posts, a nervous Canadian soldier opened fire on Doohan, shooting him just 6 times. I mean, what's wrong with you people? One of the bullets hit him in the chest. Luckily, Doohan's life was saved by a cigarette case in his breast pocket. Number 8. John F. Kennedy saved his crew with just a coconut. John F. Kennedy was deemed medically unfit to fight, but, however, he used his connections to get into the Navy anyway. Disaster struck, however, when the ship he commanded was ran by a Japanese destroyer and cut in half. Kennedy and his crew clung to the boat for about 12 hours before deciding to swim through shark-infested waters to get to land. One injured man couldn't make the trip, so Kennedy put a life jacket on him and swam him to shore, dragging the man by clutching the strap between Kennedy's teeth. The crew was stranded on the island for days before Kennedy carved a message into a coconut. Gave it to 2 natives and asked them to bring it to a nearby Allied base. His coconut message got through, and the crew was saved. Kennedy, however, kept the coconut shell ever after, and even used it as a paperweight in the Oval Office. Number 7. Tony Bennett was demoted for eating lunch with a black soldier. Before he was a singer, Tony Bennett was a corporal in the U.S. Army and part of the troop fighting its way through France and Nazi Germany. For Bennett, that battle didn't end with the fall of Berlin. It ended at lunchtime. Bennett invited old friend to lunch, which he would have been fine if his friend hadn't had black skin. Bennett's commanding officer objected and ordered the black soldier to take his meal into the kitchen. Tony Bennett launched an angry tirade against his racist commander. It was so vitriolic that Bennett got demoted to private, kicked out of his troop, and put on assignment digging up mass graves to send the boys back home. Wow. Bad luck for him. Number 6. Gene Roddenberry created a con to get in touch with a military friend. When World War II began, Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry signed up for the U.S. Army Corps. Or should I say U.S. Army Air Corps. He flew alongside a soldier who would have been his best friend during the war, and the inspiration for one of his most famous characters. Roddenberry's friend was Kim Noon Singh. and the two lost touch after the war. Wanting to get back in touch with his old friend, Roddenberry wrote a character into Star Trek. Kirk's nemesis, Con Duan Singh, hoping his friend would see and get in touch. See, never called, but Roddenberry didn't stop trying. In Star Trek The Next Generation, Roddenberry named Data's creator, Dr. Duan Song, again hoping to reach out to his old friend. Number 5. Bill Nye's father used a sundial to find the location of his POW camp. Bill Nye, the science guy's father, was captured during the war and sent to a Japanese PO camp, where he displayed some of the scientifically ingenuity that would later make his son's reputation. When the older Nye was being watched, he gathered up pebbles and scattered them around a fence post to make a makeshift sundial. By comparing the dial on his creation with the stars, Nye figured out the latitudinal location of the camp. His trick never got him rescued, however, and he never managed to share the information with anyone outside the camp. However, Nye said that playing with the sundial kept him sane. After the war, he went to the sundial business professionally. Number 4. Ernest Hemingway posed as an officer and led a French militia. Although Ernest Hemingway was just a reporter in World War II, that didn't stop him from leading an army. While in France, Hemingway found a ragtag group of French resistance fighters and decided they need better leadership. Specifically, his leadership. He tore off his non-combatant insignia, convinced the group that he was a U.S. colonel, and took charge. Hemingway led the group into the town of Rambouillet and stationed them there by telling the U.S. Army that he was ferrying weapons from another troop. He convinced them to arm him with machine guns and grenades. Then Hemingway marched his militia toward Paris. Although the plan was to lead an assault on some major cities, Hemingway most liberated bars so he could get drunk in them. His group went all the way to the Ritz in Paris, where Hemingway partied through the war. Later, Hemingway used this to claim that he was the first person to liberate the Ritz. Number 3. Audrey Hepburn ate tulip bulbs to survive. In 1944, Audrey Hepburn was in Holland when the Nazis locked down the city and began a season that would be remembered as the Winter of Hunger. Food was nearly impossible to come by, and Hepburn claims that she and her family had to resort to eating nettles, boiled grass, and tulip bulbs to survive. Toward the end, Hepburn had whittled away to a mere 88 pounds. The malnutrition racked her body with jaundice and asthma, and she very likely could have died, but she survived till 2003. On the day before the end of the war, a Dutch soldier gave the future actress 7 candy bars. Hepburn shoved all 7 of them into her mouth. Very, very fast. Number 2. Lenny Bruce pretended to be gay to get discharged. Now, after serving 30 months in the Navy, comedian Lenny Bruce was determined to get out. So, he wrote a letter to the medical officer saying that he was attractively physical to a few of the fellas. It wouldn't be able to fight his homosexual urges much longer. He convinced the officers on the ship that he was a ticking gay bomb ready to explode. If he didn't get away from all the hunky men on the ship, he would give way to the performance of homosexual acts. Surprisingly, it worked. Bruce was first relocated to a station where heterosexual companionship was available, and later given an honorable discharge. If the story sounds familiar, it's because Bruce's gay ruse was the inspiration for the cross-dressing character Corporal Klinger and MASH. Number 1. Coco Chanel was a Nazi spy. When the Nazis occupied France, some brave heroes rose up against their oppressors, but designer Coco Chanel definitely wasn't one of them. Instead, Chanel became the lover of a Nazi officer. She also became a Nazi spy. Chanel was given the codename Westminster and sent around Europe to enlist spies for the Nazis. She even made a trip to see Heinrich Himmler and offered to use her links to Winston Churchill to gather information. At the end of the war, Chanel and her Nazi lover fled to Switzerland, where they stayed together for about 10 more years. She was only spared from execution by the intervention of Winston Churchill, who took her name off the death roasters. So, what do you think? What other famous people you think are... excuse me. So what famous person on this list you think has one of the most shocking stories of World War II? Let us know in the comments section down below what top 10 you guys want us to do next. Thanks for watching, and see you guys in another top 10.